All right, today is October 28th, and incidentally, my late friend, best friend Claude's birthday would have been today. He would have been 70 years old today. So, happy birthday, Claude. We'll see you soon, buddy. So today, I'm going to be installing the G2 axle, and this is the installation instructions that guy out at 4 Wheel Parts sent to me that I've been talking to. And interestingly, it's got the disassembly process, but it doesn't have the assembly process. However, this is the diagram, so I can see how things are supposed to go. And one point of note, Auburn Gear tech guy and now John Snyder out at 4 Wheel Parts have both confirmed my contact pattern, so I'm excited about that. I've got 7 thousandths, maybe 7 1/4 thousandths of backlash, which, according to John, I wouldn't want to be any tighter than that because it can produce some extra heat that you don't want. But he said that's good though. So I always knew backlash should be between 6 and 8 on gears, so I think I'm going to be good. And he does too. But most importantly, both of them felt that the contact pattern was just about as good as you could possibly get. Let's see, what was the other thing? So I'm good to go on that. So now I'm just going to get these axles ready to install over here. This is the new G2 axle, solid axle, versus the two-piece sets that the factory axles were. So I'll be back with you. All right, so I'm starting with the driver's side here, and I've got the first step of the process here is to get this seal. Got this seal greased up. There's an actual little spring around there that kind of holds that shape on that seal to help produce the seal on the axle. Put some grease on there so it doesn't want to come off or any kind of funny business. Set that in there, and I've got my tool to install it. It's about the size of the OD of that seal, so I don't deform it as it goes in. Got my hand here. Double check, make sure I'm even all the way inside there. All right, I confirmed that the seal is in there evenly with my caliper. Took measurements at 9 and 3, 12 and 6. So the next piece to go in is this little, it's called a bearing spacer ring. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but this OD right here is a little larger than this is here. They're telling me to stick this in this way. This is a spacer. In there. Tight fit. Alright, that's going to take some work. Okay, I had to use my tool to get that seated in there. So now the next piece that has to go in is called the bearing retainer ring. That's going to, I guess, fit down inside of that. That'll actually have to get pressed onto the axle. And then at this point, I have to put the bearing in here and test and see how much of it protrudes out of the axle housing. And I'll use a feeler gauge to check that out. It's supposed to be between 20 and 60 thousandths. So I'm going to measure that and see where that is. If it's too much, then I'll have to take a little bit off of the I guess I'll have to take a little bit off of this first piece I put in here. The bearing spacer ring. I'll have to double check that, but all right, I'll be right back. I've been working on this bearing spacer here that goes in after the seal. This inner side of the housing is kind of boogered up, but there's kind of a step there. This thing has to be put in this way. And what this is it's a spacer to measure preload on the bearing, because the bearing will protrude outside of this flange by a certain amount, and they only want you to have 20 to 60 thousandths. So this spacer was too wide, or too thick. There was too much protrusion there. This started at about 632 thousandths, and what I've done is I've worked it down on a couple of things here down to 600 thousandths. So I took a little over 30 thousandths off. So what I did is using my combination belt disc sander, I took a little bit down off of this way with the coarse paper, and then I used the little bit finer paper. This is a machine surface too, so it's pretty flat. And rotated it, make sure I'm getting even pressure. And then at the very final stage, I lapped it on this 320 grit paper, and of course my table saw is a nice machine surface, so I know that it's really nice and flat all the way around, so it's not going to sit in there cattywampus or anything. So I've got it at 600 thousandths now. I'm going to put it in there, tap it in, and then check my preload on the bearing, how much bearing is protruding out of there. I'm going to kind of split the difference. I want about 40 thousandths. So 20 and 60. 40 is right there in the sweet spot. Because if you have too much protruding, then when you put everything together, there's going to be too much preload on the bearing and you'll burn them up. So I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to go for anywhere between 30 and 40. Here we go. All right, so the bearing is in there. It's pushed all the way in. There's a little bit protruding out of there. I've got 41 thousandths here on my feeler gauge. And I still feel a little bit of a lip there. So I'm going to take a little bit more off, I'm going to try to take about another 5 thousandths off. Here we go. And I'm down at around 595.5 thousandths. I'm going to work it just a little bit more. All right. I've had this thing in and out of there about 10 times now at least. This is definitely the kind of thing that you cannot endeavor when you're short on time, that's for sure. What I've got here, try to measure that with the caliper, but it's a little bit hard to do that and make sure it stays square. It's actually easier to do it with the feeler gauge. So coming across here, I'm looking at 35 thousandths. So I'm going to go with that, and hopefully I won't have to go through this you know, 10 iterations of this on the next one. But so now the next step is to get everything assembled onto the axle. All right, here we go. All right, well, I'm ready to start putting this together. So the first step is to get all these studs in right here. So I'm going to add some Loctite thread locker to it. This is a medium strength, and I'm going to put those in and torque them to, I think it's 55 foot-pounds, but I'll have to double check that. All right, here we go. All right, I got the wheel studs in. Those were to be torqued to between 65 and 75 foot-pounds, so I've got them at 70. So I'm getting ready to press everything together. There is an order to all of this. So you've got a dust shield that goes on first, you know, that's facing the wheel, the tire. Then there's a seal that goes on, and there's a spring inside that seal that you're supposed to grease, and it's facing towards the pumpkin, so facing down. Then of course the backing plate. Gotta make sure you got the right orientation here, because this is where all the brake components go. On the other side of that is the bearing, and then the not a retaining sleeve. I guess that's what it is. There's a retaining ring that goes on there as well, and then of course the spacer is already inside the axle housing. That's already been, you know, I spent about an hour and a half, you know, milling it down. So now what I'm gonna do is press this all together and hopefully have success. Here we go. Make sure everything is centered. All right, I'll be back in a minute. All right, I think that's down. So that was done. That's the driver's side. I'll go get it installed. Here we go. Okay, that one's in there. So I wanted to show more of what I was doing, but I just don't want this video to get too long. But really, after I got it all pressed on over there, it was just a matter of slipping the axle in there and then attaching these 4 bolts all the way around, you know, the bolt head coming from this side and going through that dust cover. You can see my silicone around there, around that seal. And you can also see it back here. Now, they said in the instructions for the G2 to put the, to apply silicone to both sides of the backing plate. I don't really like that, because certainly on the back side where I put it, it just made a mess, an unnecessary mess, I should say. So I think I'm going to do it a different way on the passenger side. I'm going to put it on the flange itself, because that's what they're trying to do, is, you know, create a seal off for this flange so no dirt and debris can get down in there. And the same thing there. You wouldn't want any brake dust or anything else getting inside and working on those bearings, because it'd destroy them in no time. But anyway, that one's done. So I'm going to get the other one set up, and I'll get it installed as well. All right, got the wheel studs in, torqued those down. They also have thread locker on it, just like the others, Loctite. Got those torqued down to 70 foot-pounds. Getting ready to put that seal in. Here we go. Yeah, I think I'm seated there. All right, the next step is to get the bearing spacer in. So I'm going to set that in there. Good. This one isn't going to give me the same kind of fits the other one did. I've actually got that one seated in there. And it's just the smallest of gap between it and the inner seal there. So now I'm going to get a measurement on the bearing for the protrusion. You know, being proud of this flange here, it's got to be within 20 to 60 thousandths. Here we go. So I'm going to go about this a slightly different way. I'm going to measure it first and find out where I'm at before I start milling it down. So I've got 67 thousandths right here, and it looks to be a little bit thicker than that, so maybe 70 thousandths. I want to get it to about 35, so I've got about 35 thousandths to take off. So I'm gonna go to town on that. All right, I think I'm there. I'm using 35 thousandths as my guide here. It looks like I'm flush with that. Feels pretty good. So I'm going to go on to the assembly process. All right. So I'm ready to start the assembly process. Got my stuff laid out here. So the first thing that has to go on is the dust shield in this orientation right here, with the cone shape facing the tire. That goes on, and this outer seal goes on with the spring facing in towards the pumpkin, and then I've got my silicone sealer on there as well. The next part that's going to go on is the actual backing plate. It's got to go with the pin, you know, facing the tire. That's where all the brake parts go. And at this point, I'm going to zip tie those together just to kind of hold them in place. And I've got the bearing. It goes on next. And the key point here is to make sure that that thin line right there, which is actually part of the bearing, is facing out. So the actual race is going in like that. I've got some extra grease on there too, just to make sure I've got those bearings packed real well. Alright, so the line is facing out just like it was when I was fitting it on the axle tube. So now it goes with the press ring. That's the last piece that goes on. And I'm going to get it over to the press and get it pressed in. Alright, ready to put this axle in. I've got some extra grease inside the tube there, like I did on the other side. And this time I put the silicone on the flange instead of on the back side of the backing plate. So we're ready to go in. I'm gonna have to cut those. I'm gonna have to cut those zip ties I put on because they're in the way. All right, it's done. Except the diff cover, obviously, but. Took me a little while. It wasn't really that difficult. The hardest part of it was the getting the bearing sleeve, you know, for the bearing preload, getting that little piece sized to where it needed to be. So that was really the hardest part. So yeah, there it is. The only thing I'm missing is G2 has a little button type of thing that goes right there. I'm gonna have to call 4-Wheel Parts and ask them to send those to me because it didn't come in the kit. So I know it's supposed to be there though. So anyway, that's gonna do it for today. So tomorrow I'll get this surface cleaned up, put my cork gasket in place, put some of that gray RTV around here, get those bolts put down, and then after that it'll be ready to install. So yeah, I'm glad I'm at this stage. All right, catch you guys next time.